Okay, thanks. I didn't know that you have an Institute of Advanced Studies, and I looked at bit at the webpage, and I think that's a really cool program that you have here. So I'm very happy to present something today. Um, so and then of course when you work in modeling or complex systems, sometimes it's hard to choose the topic because we're involved in so many different things. So I have a very diverse set of systems that I study. And then I thought maybe here I show you or talk about the bioinvasion. That's one theme running now over the last 15 years or so through my research. And I think it's a cool story how you can apply complex network thinking, but also modeling thinking and apply it to something related to natural systems and also ecology. So that's work together with Hanno Sebens. I don't know what you use for pointer here. So just like hand, like, but then people will not see like okay that so Hanno he was a postdoc in my group, has now his own group, and he did a lot of the work here. Michel Gassner was some time in a postdoc, and Daniel was the student in this project. Okay, so so to get the scene, what is bioinvasion? So bioinvasion means that we have an organism that's the geographic expansion of organisms or species in new areas. And so this picture should just give you a feeling for the scale. So we're talking about organisms which sit on some continent on Earth and suddenly are observed somewhere else. So I'm not talking about range expansion, so like that you have maybe some coastal species here or at the coast, and then to climate change, it's shifting its range. That I'm not talking about. I'm talking about that this species is suddenly observed somewhere totally different. And so biological invasions were always a part in the history of life. Always species managed to cross large barriers, right? But it was more a rare event. And you can see it in particular, like I'm mostly in our institute focusing on coastal organisms. Like if you have organism on the coast somewhere, it's adapted to the environmental conditions there, then the oceans act as dispersal barriers, and it's not easy for such an organism to cross these oceans. It was always possible swimming islands, and some insects can go through the air or whatever, but it was a rare event. And then now as humans, with trade, with airports, with shipping, and so on, we create these connections, and so the rates of bioinvasion increase dramatically. And that's a concern for many people. So that's why bioinvasion is a big topic in ecology, because I don't want to go too much into ecology, but if you have an organism which suddenly arrives in a new area, most of them die because you come in a hostile environment you're not adapted for, and you just most die. But if you're lucky, it's a lottery. If you're lucky and you have good conditions, then maybe you don't have your natural enemies, your predators anymore there, and then these organisms can really expand and thrive, and they can really develop to pests, and that can be really a problem. So bioinvasion is one of the factors for concern of biodiversity, ecosystem functioning. There's a lot of money spent every year to deal with the impacts. For example, if mussels go in the pipes and so on. And the idea is, maybe the question is like, it can also be something good, because like if climate changes, maybe new organisms arrive which can deal better with the new situation, can also be good. But there's this idea of this homogenization of biota. So like the idea is that you have this rare butterfly somewhere, and this might go extinct due to invasion, and then you have this weeds, nasty weeds, which can grow everywhere, and then we just have a dominance of these, and that's maybe a trend of the new what could happen. Okay, that's a general introduction. So like, when was I the first, to give you a few examples, when I was the first time I heard about bioinvasion, that was the chestnut leaf miner. So that's this insect, and it's a parasite in the chestnut leaves. And so in 2000, I was coming as a postdoc back to Germany. I was in Berlin. And suddenly in 2000, we heard there is this chestnut leaf miner there. And what you see, these chestnut trees, So in the end of summer, that's the first trees who have brown leaves. The trees are not there. It's not like it's already in summer, and it's due to this. And it's also not a agricultural problem because chestnuts is just in the city for the beauty of it. But still in Berlin, the city government said, okay, we don't want this, sir. We want our trees to be green. But then it turned out you can do nothing. Yeah, so they said maybe take off the leaves, ask people to avoid this life cycle of the parasites and so on. But it didn't help. And so what happened is like observed this first time was this parasite increase. Yeah, and then it started to spread a little bit, and then it made one jump to Austria, probably by some traffic, some trade. And then from Austria, it spread through Europe in a traveling wave. And then around 2000, it was Berlin. And now something like it's probably at the range of its expansion. And this example showed me the importance of modeling, because once such a species, such an invasion event happened and it spread on the scale of a continent, it's too late. We can do nothing. Like, what could we do now if we want to get rid of this? Yeah? So you would either have to pesticize or kill every tree in Europe and try to grow up again, or like what would you do? But if we would have had any early warning and could have done something here or here, we would have maybe some more easy job to do. So and that gave me then I started to be interested in bioinvasion because suddenly I was aware the impact such a thing can have. One other example to show you how this can look, that's the Pacific oysters in the Waddensee. That's German Waddensee, but in the Dutch Waddensee, it will look similar. And so this Pacific oysters, they came from aquaculture and then escaped. And if you would have had a picture there when it was taken 20 years before, you would just have seen mud flats and some mussels, yeah? Just sediment and mussels. And then these oysters come, and then as far as you can see, we have these oysters. They are like concrete. They make really hard structure and totally change the ecosystem there. It changes the water currents. And now we have hard substrates, so we have new invasions can settle on this because our native species are not adapted for hard substrates. We don't have so much hard substrates in the Waddensee, so you now have sargassum coming in and other species. But when you look at this, then it tells you, okay, the power we're talking about, even though I don't go in much examples. I want to show you one more example. That's the Miniopsis, the jellyfish. And it's interesting for two facts. I mean, so it came from over the Atlantic. It comes from the east coast of US and Canada. And it first arrived here in the Black Sea. And the Miniopsis is a predator of fish larvae, and it totally led to a collapse of fishery in the Black Sea. So it was real economic disaster. And some years later, then another second invasion came, a predator of this, a second jellyfish, and then system recovered. And some years later, a similar scenario happened in the Caspian Sea. Again, total collapse of fishery, of economics, because you can imagine all the countries around such a sea, they live on fishery, and that can be a real problem. So I saw videos like fishers go out, look in the water, you just see the jellyfish, and they take the nets, and they have maybe one fish, and the rest is just some jellyfish there. So big disasters. So like it's interesting for the impact, and it's interesting because then later we had invasion of the jellyfish, the Miniopsis in the North Sea and in the Baltic, and they don't do anything bad there. And then the question is like, why? So like, so it can be that either a species which arrives in a certain habitat has certain traits, but if it goes in different habitats, it can have different traits. And the reason is why, maybe because the water is colder, or maybe are we talking about the same subspecies? I don't know the taxonomy. So, and now the idea is that maybe we had independent invasions. So like we had these species here, which came over from more southern part over the Atlantic. And these are different species which came independently over. This species come by ballast water by shipping. So shipping really brought the species in. And that's maybe a different subspecies with different traits. And I want to show you this picture here. It's not always a ring wave. Yeah? So like when you, like here before, we had this classic paradigm of a ring wave. And now when we speak about different waters with a more complex geometry, it's more like a network thing. So like invasion patterns, now these, and that's will be our next topic, like the network structure plays a role. And the classic paradigm, when you look in the mathematic biology books, is that invasion is a traveling wave, right? So you have a homogeneous habitat, you put some focus there, and then you have just reaction diffusion equation, and just you have a traveling front. And this is here done in this modeled in a simple SI model for an infectious spread. And the classic example we have in our head maybe is the spread of bubonic plague over Europe in the Middle Ages, where you see this traveling wave, similar we had in this leaf miner before. But if you look carefully, if you zoom in the spread of bubonic plague, so that's a picture from Encyclopedia Britannica. So you see again in different years the front of the disease, how it spread over Europe. And you see in orange where it came. So like we got this also by trade. We got the bubonic plague by the Silk Street over Asia. That's how it arrived. And in the first year, so like the arrows show you the trade routes of this time. So you see again this other pattern that we had in the jellyfish. So you have different foci of different trading centers within Europe, and they were infected. So like in the arrival of the disease came through the trading network, started there, and then later only we have this other pattern of the traveling wave. And when you zoom a little bit more in, like for example, I don't have a figure for this, like in Italy here, on a rough scale, it looks like a traveling wave, but when you look more carefully and you have to trade the routes between the cities, so it's spread from city to city on a route network. So maybe if already, so like maybe the network idea is maybe more important or important factor for spread of diseases, for example. And if this was already the case in the Middle Ages, the more so it will be today. So let's look a little bit. So like, what do we do with our landscapes, like as humans nowadays? And so like we have like two orthogonal things, opposite things that we do. On the one hand, like let's in the square in the left, the rectangle, that would be this pristine world, homogeneous, which of course never existed, but that could be something we had in our mind. And then what do we do? On the one hand, we reduce dispersal by habitat fragmentation. So we create diffusion barriers because we disconnect the landscape, right? On the other hand, we increase dispersal, and that's this trading things, ships, railways, highways, and so on. And now if you do both together, on the one hand, you cut your landscape. On the other hand, you connect these pieces by large range connection. What before was this 2D homogeneous landscape where you would have the traveling wave, now is more a network where you have a more complex invading pattern. Yeah, so that's why I think that this spread in the network is more important for invasions today. So what would be the consequences? And that's, I mean, also a well-known figure. So that's two trading networks in the US. The left is the highway network. On the right is the aviation, the airplanes, right? And so this was interesting. Like at some time when the swine flu was in Mexico, and it was threatening to spread in the US. And the question would now be, if now the swine flu, like the disease, is arriving and transported with the highway network or with the aviation network, what would be the difference? right? And here you see like these networks have different topology. Like here, it's more like a random geometric network. So where you basically have maximal 3 to 4 neighbors in a node. Whereas in the highway network, you have these hubs, like you have these airports like Chicago and so on, connected to everything. And here you would expect maybe the traveling waves going through the US. And here you would expect that the big airports will be directly infected, and then from them maybe more complicated figure how the other airports would be connected. So that was a general introduction. And then, so my research then started then around this time. That was the first SARS epidemic. And I worked with Dirk Brockmann. We had a proposal. And at this time, he used the aviation network, which connects countries in the world, and made a simulation and saw, okay, when you make a simple model, you can predict how the disease spread over the world. And maybe to make it clear, a spread of a disease is, of course, nothing than a bioinvasion of a microparasite. So that's also bioinvasion. But then I was in the Marine Institute. I came to the ICBM and then said, okay, can we do the same thing with bioinvasion, right? The same modeling approach. But now for bioinvasion, the relevant network is not the airplane network, it's the shipping network. So basically everything you buy in a supermarket comes by ships, right? And the ships also for stability have a lot of ballast water. Here you see what happens if a ship is not balanced. It can fall apart. It can even break. I mean, the ships are large as football fields. And when you're now in Rotterdam, in the port, and they put some parts on the ship, right? So then the ship starts to bend, and then they always have to put water in the ship to equalize everything. And so you can have 100,000 tons of ballast water in a ship, right? So the ship is full of ballast water. And if an oil tanker, it has 2 tanks, one for oil and one for water. And so the oil tanker then transports ballast water. And then it comes from Saudi Arabia, takes water there, comes to Rotterdam or Hamburg, and then releases all the water in our ports. And so like that's one of the biggest vectors for species movement transport on the globe. Nowadays, okay, now we have ballast water treatment things and so on, but these also don't work so reliable. And I mean, then you take this ballast water and every larvae, cell, algae, whatever is in the ballast water goes in the tank of the ship and is then transported and then released again. Okay, and then the idea was, okay, that was the research question. Now, can we reconstruct the network of shipping and then model the spread of invasive species? Now, the thing is, I thought at this time, yeah, just go to the web and download the shipping network. And it was not there. It turned out, no, it's not there. Then you go to the ports, but ports, it's not like this romanticized idea I had about, like you read in the books when I was a child, like ports, and you have sailors in the ports with carrying stuff. No, a port looks like this nowadays. And you don't get access. I mean, they don't even answer you, and then they go to the shipping companies, and the shipping companies, no, we don't give the information. So it took us some years to get the shipping network. And what helped us was then the AIS system that arrived around 2000. So that's now every ship needs to have this. That's a transmitter in a ship, and it transmits an ID of the ship. And that's basically for security reasons, because in the port you see which ships arrive. So people were afraid of terrorists, and so also avoid collisions, because ships come together and then they see the other ship, and everybody can receive this. That's not I say not hidden or something. But of course, you can only have a certain distance, like 20, 30 kilometers, the visibility, how far you. But if when a ship comes in a port, everybody with a receiver can collect this data. And then but then we needed this for everything. We needed this for all ships in the world. When does a ship enter a port in the world? And this one company, they collected the data. So nowadays, there are much more data about this. Like you can go in the web shipmarinetraffic.com and you see picture of all the ships in the world. But you see just a snapshot. If you want now year data, it's really expensive because they realize that researchers are interested in this and it's not cheap, this data. At this time, so we approached this company because we were the very first scientists to be interested in this. We approached them and I said, yeah, maybe if you're non-commercial, we can give you, which ship do you want? He said, no, everything here. And then, and then that would be a 6-digit sum we would have to pay for this. But then we got access to the web page. And in the web page, you could, with the mouse, click on a ship, and then you saw the route of a ship. And then I thought, okay, now I can either ask all my students every student does 100 ships, or we write a small program. And so we wrote a small program which was doing this. So it's a gray zone because it was not really clear if we were allowed to do this, but okay. But then we downloaded basically the movement of every ship there in 2007. So we're talking about 1,000 ports, 30,000 ships, and 1 million trajectories. And so the information we have only when a ship is in a port. So you see like a ship, like it's come from Germany, going here in Europe, and then it goes to South America and comes back to Rotterdam, Hamburg, and so on. So these container ships, they're like a bus. They always go in a circle through the ports, more or less. It's a very irregular thing. And we have only this. We have then the timestamps when it's in the port, and we see the next port. And then for every ship, we have a small network. And then we can connect these networks. I don't have the figure here. Doesn't matter. And then it's like, what do you do with the data, right? So first, then you make tables, and it's on purpose very small that you don't start to read. You see, okay, there's different ship types, bulk carriers, cargo ships, and tankers, and so they have different characteristics. And then you calculate all the typical network properties, mean degree, distance. Question? Yeah.
The weight here.
Sorry?
The weight.
The frequency. Yeah. No, that's the weight. That's now like we have then the full network of all the ships, right? And then you take the nodes of the network are the ports, and the weight is the number of ships that cross between these two ports in this year. So the weight is the traffic between two ports. But I come to this later. So first you calculate to make a table, and then, okay, it's maybe also not so interesting. What do you learn? And then you start to look for distribution, for example, like the weight distribution or node distribution and so on. And you see it's a scale-free distribution. Okay, it's nice. And you can look now for the critical exponents. But that's also something you see also in other transportation networks. It's not something very new. So where can you publish this? Even though it's the first study on networks, but what do you do with this? And then Michael Gassner, my postdoc, said, let's make a visualization. Yeah. And that's sometimes that's one first story here. If you can make a good figure, that's all the difference if this now appears in a technical journal or if it's a more broader interest journal. But the problem is we have, of course, only the ships at ports. We don't know where they go over the ocean. We don't have the data, but we can model this. And so we want now with that's one ship in this year. And the red dots are the ports and the black lines we want to model. How can you model this? And then you can assume the ship takes between two ports the shortest path on open water between these two ports. But how do you get this? So that was really also very tricky. It took us also a year to figure this out. So you have to rasterize all coastlines. Okay, that's easy. And then you have to make first a routing network. For example, we take the blue port, and green are all ports where you can go in a single hop, like on open water. And then you have the spherical geometry. And so since the lines then here are curved in this projection, so you can go directly in open water to these points. So you have this routing networks. And then you have now the shortest path in the routing networks gives you then these trajectories. Yeah, so but in order to do this, and that's important, I show this the technical details here. In order to do this, we have to make some assumptions. We have to make an assumption: does the ship go through the canals, Suez Canal or Panama? That's one thing, yes or no. And the other thing, we have to say something about the Arctic. Right, so like we said, okay, ships cannot go certain latitude because there's ice. And that will become later because this parameter later I can now open, and then I can now also calculate ships routes which go through the Arctic. And that's something I come back to later. But at this point, the Arctic is closed. And then we got this figure. So now that's the figure Michael did. And here you see now the shipping intensity in color coding, so the yellow. So you see like it's a high shipping, and you see shipping is not spread all over the ocean. The shipping is really centered like highways, right, over the world. And with this, suddenly the newspapers were interested, or reporters came. That was the first time I'm doing research and people are actually interested in what I was doing, you know. And of course, the reporters want to know now the bad things about what's happening, what's piracy, and when what's bad can come with the shipping. But suddenly we had here a figure of globalization, and that's actually something we didn't intend to do. I wanted the shipping only for doing bioinvasion, but suddenly we had the trade network, and now this figure went in. Artists came, and it was going into museums, and it's in a World Children Atlas, and it was really amazing. Even 10, 15 years after the paper, still I got emails, can we have this figure for? And just because we have a figure, and maybe here the resolution you see, like, so that's the resolution we had done, like you see here in the North Sea, one of the strongest shipped areas in the world. And yeah, so that's also one story. And I mean, like, to show you the impact of this, then I got the question? No. Yeah. Then let me tell the story first. Yeah. So I got an email from the commander of the US forces in the Pacific. Yeah? That's not my normal email contact. And he wrote me, he saw this figure here, if you can give them a figure centered on the Pacific. And that was not so easy. I mean, you just take the right part and put it on the left. So that was 2 lines of code. We sent it to him, and then I got an email back, thank you, and if we can be of any service to you or something. And I asked my wife, what should I ask them? And she said I should ask them about the Navy vessels or something, but we didn't dare to. So like if you manage to make a good figure, you suddenly, it can open doors. But now you have a question, yeah?
Yeah, so the map you construct is based on the assumption that the ships take the shortest route.
Right. Yeah.
But there are storms.
Yeah.
Whatever, so
right. I mean, like,
there are all kinds of reasons that the ship actually goes.
Yeah. Right. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, first, there's currents. So a ship, even without storms, would not go the shortest path. They make a small deviation, but it's not so big. Actually, even when you go here in the Atlantic, where you have this current, it's not such a deviation. And then, I mean, like with this, I got a lot of emails from company in Germany. They want now go back to sailing with cargo ships, like to save energy. And there can be used something like this to see how ships really go. And like in particular, when you go sailing, like it's not the sails anymore. They have this turbines, this cylinder things, like, and then of course, depending how the storm patterns in the wind, you go a little bit different. But basically, it's still very accurate. And we also, I come to this later, calculated then the distances between ports, and the distances are not so much different. Like on this scale, okay, now when you go here in the North Sea, of course, ships cannot go where they want, right? So like it's very regulated. But in the end of the day, it's more or less the straight lines. So like also here, the representation is very good. But I totally agree. That's the model assumption, and we didn't really, because like where's the data to compare it against here? So like it's an assumption, but I think on the scale it's very good. When you were first, I think, and
I'm still very confused by the fact that you in 2007 were the first with this kind of picture, but
what before was there was a density of shipping maps that we saw something, but nobody had the network. Yeah.
nowadays, I mean, with all these ships having GPS and these kind of things and public websites tracking
Yeah.
these things, it should be able to draw these maps.
Nowadays,
using
it's
the
a bit
actual
more,
physical position
yeah.
instead of just standing.
Yeah, but you need to collect this. Like there's some ships which have open GPS trajectories, but you want to have it for all ships, and this is not openly available. And so, for example, then later there's in Paris there's a research group. They got shipping connections. They also downloaded something, and there is the logbook. Which was in London, like the where they have the logbooks of all the ships, like and centuries before, and you know where the ships went, like 3 centuries before now, and you have also the weather information and all this. And they were able to get the data, and then the museum figured out, oh, scientists are interested, and now you cannot afford it anymore. And he made this whole research group based on this, that he's the only person in the world who has the data. And when you want to work on this, you need to contact him. And they're looking now for the geology, for the politics, and so on of this. There's now many groups trying to, but it's still the most difficult thing is to get the data still.
So that's
Yeah.
open access.
Yeah, I mean that's why we have open access, right? And for example, in my case also, I cannot really give my data because it was not really bought. It was a gray zone with the company. So I think we made a very good advertisement for the company, but on the other hand, it's a gray thing. I cannot like we had at this time we had a anonymized version where we just had number of nodes, node IDs, but we didn't say which port this is, and that's what we could give. Yeah, but that's to see why it's important to have public accessible repositories, right? Yeah.
Following up on one of the previous questions. So are there like spots in the ocean that you also close off, just like you did to the Arctic?
No, here is nothing closed. Otherwise, we have some canals where we have to find some, we can now open or close them. Like here, I think they're all open. And then like in the estuaries, we have to, like it goes very technical. Like when you go here in the Rhine or in the Elbe or in some rivers, you by hand have to make certain that you can really reach the ports or something like this. But basically, nothing is closed here.
Yeah.
Go very close to the Antarctic, seems.
Here, yeah, okay, but that's here maybe one thing, and then I mean like it's a question, like you have different classes, you have research vessels and so on. I think the research vessels are not shown here. Then you have ferries, and then it depends on the version. What do you want to show? I think that's global, everything what we identified as cargo shipping, and research vessels are not there because then you would have some things going to Antarctica, for example. But that goes now in a lot of details. Yeah, so like when you want to do is like you have many variations how you can show this and so on. Let me rather continue because now we had this, yeah, and now the things like now finally we can do what we plan to do. We can model the invasion process, and now there is a risk, a danger when you have your tool. There's a danger just to use your tool. And for me, the most simple in the world would be just starting a port, putting here some species, and just let it spread, like you do with the SARS or some disease. And we did this also, but the problem is that was not the question because we don't know who is coming, right? So like we're concerned maybe from the North Sea, but we don't know, is it a fish coming, a mussel, an algae? we have no idea who's coming. And so we don't, it would not solve our problem to model the spread of one specific species, so making population dynamics. And so rather we wanted the risk, the probability that any species might arrive in a pod. So we had to start, like for me, it was a totally new modeling framework I never did before. And the idea is you have a source community somewhere in some port in the world and their destination community. And then in the invasion literature, you have certain steps that you need to do in order to have a successful invasion. So first, the species needs to survive the transport. And the ballast tank is not a good habitat. So it's oxygen deprived. So like species die, the longer it takes, when it's dark and so on. So it needs to survive the transport. And in the second step, the released organism needs to establish here. So I said before, like most die because the water temperature is wrong, salinity is wrong, and so on. So we have several steps. We have also this first P alien. I come to this in the beginning. We didn't have this. We just had two probabilities. And we hope they're independent so that we can multiply them. And then you model this. Like, forget about the first one. We just had the second, the two. And for the introduction, the transport, we just basically have travel time. So you say exponentially with travel time, species die. And then we have here some exchange, like some, we say at every stopover port, a certain fraction of the ballast water is exchanged. So ballast waters are diluted. And then we put in here even some potential management. So we say potentially at every port, you can say, I try to clean the water or don't exchange anything. So that was the transport, but basically exponential in travel time. And for the establishment, basically, it's a Gaussian function of niche overlap. So like differences in temperature and salinity as the two main factors for the abiotic environment. And also, like we played around, you can have a function of resistance of the diversity in the destination community. So like you could assume maybe a more diverse community is more resistant or something, but that's not so important. And then we did this, we modeled this. And what turned out for the North Sea, the most risky water was the Baltic Sea. That was the biggest risk. And then we said that cannot be true, because we are not afraid of the Baltic. Yeah? So like we don't know any species probably which have invaded the North Sea from the Baltic. And then we're thinking back, yeah, it's clear because we just modeled the transport of organisms, but we didn't have the fact if it's invasive. So we needed to include the fact that the organism which comes is not native there. So we needed the probability that this organism we're talking is alien in the new port. Yeah? So, and then we said, well, we have a new probability the species is alien. And then in order to see how does this, what's the probability that the species is alien, we look for biogeography and say with a certain distance between ports, we have the probability that species is alien. And then you look in the biogeography, how this community dissimilarity decay. And that's the only thing which we really needed to fit things. We assumed that this is a bit more here, a sigmoidal. So we say some 100 kilometers, we have homogeneous communities. Like if you go some 100 kilometers, you don't have alien species. So that's an assumption that was really crucial. So we didn't took the normal function that fitted best, but you could also take a Holling-free function, something. But this value where this changes the slope, that was the crucial parameter. All the other things didn't matter so much. And then we simulate, then you simulate this, of course, over all shippings and so on. You do the techniques, and it's a lot of computation because like for every ship, and then you have this different stopovers, like you can go first to the next port, you can go somewhere else in the world and then come to the port, and you have the sum of all these indirect things. And then we, of course, now always make nice figures, and then we have no figure where now the colors give us invasion risk. Okay, so, okay. But what do you do with this now? You have the invasion risk, and so we can of course now look which are the most risk high risk ports. And then you see like, so at this time, then I realized the dominance of Asian trade. So the most high-risk ports are in Asia, and then here Singapore, Shanghai, and so on. We have the canals, Suez and Panama, and ports in the US. Yeah. Okay, where's the North Sea? We know the North Sea is one of the most area with most shipping. Why didn't we have risk here? And the reason basically is that it comes from the geographic distribution of the other trading parts in the world. The other trading centers in the world are more tropic, subtropic waters, very warm, very saline, whereas geographically, Northern Europe is a bit different. It's more colder waters. So this gives a bit of, reduces the invasion risk in the model for this. Yeah. Yeah.
So you don't include the possibility that actually organisms are in multiple stops coming to the North Sea?
No, here not. Yeah, that would
It's only one-stop jump.
yeah, you're right. I mean, the ship, of course, can make many stops, but we then have just the direct invasion. Of course, that would be also something like to see, like, okay, it could come here and then slowly maybe adapt, and then that we didn't do, right? Yeah, that would be. Then one thing to look at this more systematically is, again, that's the spaghetti of all invasion risks. And now we can zoom in the North Sea, Northern European seas, in this black rectangle, and see what's the risk to have any invasion coming in here. And we see for in our case, we have the highest risk directly over the Atlantic. Yeah? Very focused, very centered. And why is this? I mean, first here we have the similar water temperatures, so similar environmental conditions, similar salinity. It's far away that we have alien species there, so it needs to be far away. It's still close enough that the organisms don't die during transport. So that says the thing, it's just far enough, but also not too far. Similar is when you have here in west coast of US, you have a very focused invasion over the Pacific. But when you look at China, Northwest Pacific, it's very different. There the risk is spread. In this area in the world, you can have received invasions here from Australia, the Suez route over the Pacific. So this means different parts in the world have a very different kind of focus where their invasion comes from. It can be very focused or it can be very spread out. So that was interesting. Then you can compare to data. Comparison to data was not so easy because you have a lot of data about invasion, but you don't have so much data where the origin of species was. So we just found 5 studies, your 4 case studies in certain ports where invasion comes from, and the top is modeled and the bottom one is reported, and the columns show you different colors, different oceans. And so, like, you see, the pattern is quite okay for such a crude model. And that here was a study here reported again, which oceans have how many invasions, and that's what we identified in the model. This was also, like, for such a crude model, very okay, because we don't have any details on the specific of organisms. This goes for everything. And then in order to see the differences, now it depends on details. If you say that, for example, diversity is a factor. Like, for example, in our main model, we had too small invasion risk for Asian ports, which are very diverse. And then we said, okay, let's put into the model that that high diversity protects you. And then the referees say, no, you cannot put this. There's no evidence from this. Okay, so we make another paper, send to a different journal, and say, okay, now we don't have this. And then why don't you put invasion resistance, diversity resistance? It's so important. And we put it back. Then another journal, and so on. And finally, we had in our supplement 3 different versions. Like, pick what you want, because, like, the referees always, wanted orthogonal things. But this, like, when you want to fit now to different ecoregimes, like, that was like if you put in such process or not, you can improve the fit a little bit. But in total, it's not so bad for such a model. And then it's always nice if you can predict something. So like, for example, here, suddenly in order to study our model, so we said, let's plot the invasion risk as a function of distance. Yeah. And you see this pattern that you have highest risk for 1,000 kilometers, 10,000 kilometers. Then let's look in the data that we have. And we looked in the data and we found a very similar pattern. And then Hanno said, okay, what about different database? So he took now, that was just for the marine invasions. Then he went in the global invasive species database, where every recorded invasion was at this time. And we found, again, the similar pattern. And we called this intermediate distance hypothesis or quarter globe rule, because this distance is a quarter of the globe. But how can you explain the pattern? Yeah, but in the end, it's very, very easy. So you say for small distance, we don't have alien species, so you don't have invasions. There is no alien species. Then you have this 10,000 kilometers. That's the good. And when you're too large, first you don't have so much transport over this large distance, and then species don't survive the transport. In a sec here. And then you have these modes here. And these modes, I come back to this later if I don't speak too long. These are the continents. So that's within Europe trade, that's over Atlantic trade. And so this gives these modes. Yeah.
So the actual scaling of survival is a function of distance of transport.
Yes, that we had exponential risk in the model, but then also traffic is less for larger distance, and both together mean you don't have invasions for very large distances.
The actual decay rate estimated from like empirically?
Yeah, we like that was this part here, and here we looked in data like what they would expect from in ballast tanks. Yeah. Yeah.
Is distance, is this?
It's the shipping distance. It's not the geographic distance, it's the shipping distance, what we took. Basically travel time. And we said travel time is proportional shipping distance, which you only have if you have the shipping routes. Otherwise, you don't have this. Yeah, exactly. Okay, we had this, yeah.
There is a lot among different groups of species. So some will easily survive for longer transport.
Yes, yeah, but okay, that's just also here we didn't go into this. Like you could even start like this is even marine and terrestrial, even like it's also terrestrial patterns, and you could try to distinguish this, and we didn't go into this here, and you're totally right. I will come to this also later, but at this study we didn't look at this. Yeah. But it was just like, I mean, that's the funny thing, like you always, when you have a model and if you can make a prediction and then, wow, look at the data and then it looks like this, that's this rare, wonderful moments when you see, okay, wow, we get something. Of course, like then we thought, oh, we've invented now something big. Okay, it's now, we was published in Ecology Letters, but it's not like everybody would use this. So it's a nice fact, but the consequences are not so spectacular or something. Okay, then I just want to skip this, but what we now then did later, I mean, this was just the risk coming from A to B on the world. And if you now have data on ranges of some species, for example, we did this for algae, but also for fishes, and then you can also try to predict the identity of species. And something like you get always with these models, you get to 60-70% of accuracy. And for example, we did this for algae. We looked for known distributions and then predicted the top high risk species for the North Sea. And then it turned out when we looked carefully, 2 of the species were already in the North Sea. So like it was also not so bad that we predict 10 species, which we think would be the next species. And then the people tell us, no, 2 of them are already there. So, but I want now to go to something else, like, because that was all study, like that was now some years ago. And then the next thing, that was Hanno. We wanted to go back. Yeah, so Hanno started his own research group, and he made an effort. He contacted every invasion ecologist and said, "Can you give me your data? I want to make a database of every known invasion event in any books, whatever." And the first events started here some thousand before Christ, like the mammoths basically in the Mediterranean, then Southern Europe, like the wild boar was invaded, wild cat and mouses and so on. And then it goes on and on and on. So we have quite a lot of data. And then, I mean, we call this always a first record. When the species, like when the mouse the first time enters the database, we call it a first record. This means the mouse the first time invaded a country, yeah, and it's in the database. We call this a first record. And then the mouse might later invade a second country and so on. And this here, when we call it also an emerging species when it's coming the first time. So here, mouse is emerging as an invasive species. So we have the emerging species, which the first time, and we have first records when how many countries did a species invade. Now you could think, okay, who knows the accuracy of this? But then you can look how many species we have. So like how many different species invaded countries and how many we have, how many first records we have, and then this starts to increase. And when you go more in time, and particularly then later we take everything serious after Columbus, like after 1500, and you see some here in exponential increase, and you see the ratio of these two is kind of a constant. So like there seem to be some patterns.
But
Yeah.
to what extent is this actually, influenced by just the observations?
Yeah, I come to this now with this here. So like we made in one paper, which is now really strongly cited because Hanno really put together all this invasion ecologists. And the question was, do we reach a point of saturation? That was the research question. Do we reach already at a stage where everything is already everywhere, or are we still at the beginning? And then we start to see, like after Columbus here until start of industrialization, we have something like 8 invasions per year recorded somewhere. And then with industrialization, we start to see an increase. You see world wars where not so much was recorded, and you see with container shipping a higher slope, right? So, and then now we have something like 580. Now we have even more, 600 invasions per year. So like every day we have 2 invasions. Every day, 2 species invade a new country, and that's in the literature. We don't know about the real number, that's in the literature. And so like there was no sign of saturation because this is here that things are not in the database. So it's still increasing. So that was about the amount. And yeah, questions I come second. And here we looked a little bit at different taxa, right? To see, and then you see like, for example, in mammals, this is decaying. So because we can control invasion of mammals, maybe mammals are also everywhere. Also in fishes, it's going down, maybe also because fish are declining, but maybe because also we have this under control. But in most taxa, it's increasing here. So, and there's many more. So I don't want to go too much in this because we really go now in the invasion ecology. But now your question, of course, the thing is this real or do we just here record our observation, right? So you could say science started here and yeah, so like that's also what my concern was. But the consensus in this paper, and it's a many author paper of all this invasion specialists, is that this is true, that maybe we have a reporting factor, but they say that even at these times when a certain butterfly arrived, they knew. I mean, they see the butterfly arrived in this country, but you could also say, okay, many areas were not sampled, and then you go on a certain island, start to sample, this came later. Of course, there is a bias in there, and in some modeling things and this, they try to estimate this bias. It's hard to know. To be honest, it's hard to know, but this the consensus of these authors in the paper, and I was just a small part of this. They said we believe it. Yeah.
This may be more a definition question, but invasion is always, by definition, successful.
Yes, it's established. It's started. It's not you observe one individual. No, it means like we have really a population which establishes there. I mean, typically also when notation, when we say an invasive species is also connotated with a negative impact. That's why we don't call them invasive species. We call them first records, because invasive always means negative. Yeah.
On this question, so I was wondering what happens if you divide the number of invasions by the total number of described species. I mean, in 1750, I mean, how many?
I don't know if we know how many species we had at every point. Do we know this? Do you have over the centuries I don't know if this information is there. Would also be interesting. Yeah.
Someone on Earth should be able to.
Maybe this. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, actually, I never thought about this. Maybe I should ask Hanno if they did this there. It would be, I mean, enough to have a few points, right? If we would know here and here and here, what's the number of how you call that collected species or something like this, and see if the fraction is changing or something. Yeah.
For many of these small mussel species, I mean, it would be possible that around 1800 they were just all mussel instead.
But this goes beyond really the expertise that I have. For me, something else was interesting. Like what would you guess? What was the most invasive of these species? Which species invaded the most countries? Rats is a good thing. I'm sure for rats there, but it's not the number one. So the number one is the pigeon, right? So do we have rat here? No, it's even not here. So like the pigeon, and then ants I knew from invasion literature and something sparrow and so on. That's the most. So the pigeon invaded 160 countries or so. And then we made another paper, because the interesting thing here was that the most species of them in the database are emergent. They invaded only a single country. Because like what people try to do, they try to make blacklists or a whitelist, or how they're called, and of number of species that you're, because you want to know is a species invasive or not. And what you say, what trait makes a species invasive, and we don't really know. So you say a species which invaded many countries, we put on a list, and then all countries try to protect that they're not allowed in. But this concept doesn't make sense if most of them just have invaded a single country. Yeah, so like they cannot be in these lists. So like that was the point of this paper here. But then now for now complexity science, when I looked at this and I say, okay, if I see a power law, I recognize that that's a power law. And then try it, is this really power law? And then you can plot it on a double logarithmic scale. You see here the pigeon and the ant and so on. And if you make log binning, and then you see a very broad distribution. It's not a perfect power law, but it's like 2 orders of magnitude. That's something I would say it's very close to power law, or it has at least a power law tail. And if you know, like when we see a power law, there's always the question, what is the reason for the power law? What could be here the mechanism? And then something very weird, and then because I have the history, I can go back 2000 before, 5000 before Christ. Of course, the number of invasions increased. So I divided the time into several epochs where I have more or less the same number of species, and plot the histogram for all these epochs, and we have the same distribution. And that's bizarre. I couldn't believe this. How possibly can it be that we have the same power law dominating invasion distributions here some 1,000 years before and today? So that was very bizarre. What's happening here? And then I did try to make some models. And then like one thing, maybe Simon process, that's like rich get richer process or preferential attachment. That's one of the processes that you can use to produce power laws. So okay, yeah.
Your definition of first record, of course, depends on what your geographical unit is.
It's country, exactly. It's based on this. Here it's country, yeah.
Country, current country.
That's yeah. Countries change. I don't know how we dealt with this there. Actually, yeah. Good question. I would have to look myself. I don't really know. I just have the data. How they tried to resolve this, I don't know.
Because the tail of your power law distribution, of course, your power law distribution is limited by the number of countries.
Yes, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you expect it to always flatten out on some point.
Yes, that's. I mean, like it must be here, right? It cannot be. Yeah, that's a limit. Like it should be truncated somewhere, right? Actually, with the countries, I don't. Yeah.
Your last dot actually goes over 200 in the left thing, and
yeah.
as far as I remember, there was something like
No, that's the bin. Yeah, so but here you see, like we have 160. That's the largest here, and then you make log binning, and then and then the bin goes to there, right? Okay, and okay, then Simon process says like this, like you have this rich get richer, or it was done for word frequencies and texts and so on. So in the ecological version of this, you have a source pool of species, and then you have countries or regions, but it's basically countries. And then you say with a certain, you have discrete time. Every time step is the next invasion event. And then with a certain probability, a new species emerges. So it invaded a single country. So you have a new species which invaded one country. And then with a certain probability, you have secondary invasions. And the secondary invasions go with rich get richer. The more countries the species has invaded, the higher the risk to have more. So that's the model. Actually, the problem is the model doesn't make really sense ecologically, because you would think that if you have this preferential attachment, so this ratio between these two cannot be fixed. But that's how how this model works, Simon. So I tried this, and actually that's how this looks in the first invasions in the real data. So you have always the next step, the next species, and how many countries this invaded. And you see like it's not the very first, but the first species, like this first mover advantage. The species who first invaded, they later have also the most number of countries. So like this model really also reproduces what's in the data, just looking by eye. But you can solve the model. Like, I mean, that model is analytically solved. And it has only two parameters. It has this probability here, and for this preferential attachment to say which are the new countries which are invaded, like it's a certain probability, and it has here also some constant. I fitted these two parameters. Then I have an analytic function. I don't have a fitting parameter anymore. I just plot this analytic function, and that's the black line. Now that's when I was falling from my chair, because I couldn't believe this. Because like we can typically fit such a function. That's a better function. We can fit such a function to data, but usually we need to tune a parameter. You have some scale parameter, your exponent, you tune it until it fits there. But my parameters were already done. I just could plot it and it's there. And that's something, but it's not published. It's still there. So, and I still try to understand what's going on here. But I find this so exciting because there could be something universal in invasions over centuries. And that's, and maybe if I have some time, let me just give you some, because we run maybe out of time. One new thing, also what I'm doing, like I told you, we have this shipping thing, like I can now compute how the ship moves through the world. And that's the assumption if the Arctic is closed, and now we can open the Arctic in the model either a little bit or fully. Yeah, so like that would be the red one is the situation we have nowadays in summers. Ships can go through this route. And now we want to see how does the connectivity change in the new world? What should we expect? And that's the histogram of all different routes on Earth, like now computed. We take all pairs of ports and look for the shipping distances. And you see again these modes we had seen before, the European trade, Atlantic trade, and so on. And now we can color code this by all routes which are shortened when the Arctic is open. So you see only 20% or so of routes are shortened. And it's clear, for example, within Europe, nothing is affected if the Arctic is opening. And it's only the large routes which are shortened, like if you really go long distances. But these are shortened a lot. Yeah, so they can be shortened several thousand kilometers. And the effect, in order to judge this, is a little bit like opening the canals of Suez and Panama. That's have a similar impact on the shipping. And you remember the Suez Canal was blocked some years ago. There was a tanker there, and it was a real factor for economy. And so like opening of the Arctic when ships will go. I mean, still it's a risky thing. You need ice class ships and it's expensive. But if ships goes, it should have a similar effect. So we did this, forget here. For example, now we can look again, like how does the geometry change? Which ports in the world would be affected? And then that's very interesting. So you see, like that's the typical candidates. You would expect ports here have shorter distances to others because they can now connect to Europe via the Arctic. Interestingly, Europe in average has not such a strong benefit, but that's just the fact that we have so much within Europe traffic that on average, the reduction here is not so strong. Surprising for me was that we still have a reduction of shipping distances to Australia and New Zealand. And I show you this later, that's direct connection through the Pacific. And you see here this divide. So like suddenly when you go to the Indian Ocean, suddenly there is no reduction anymore. So, and that's very interesting, of course, for future trading things. Like if you're now in a spot like the Singapore or something, a little bit more to the west, that could be a real negative effect, like because like these countries don't, or these ports don't benefit from opening Arctic anymore.
What do you mean? Why do you call that a negative effect from the perspective of the shipping?
For perspective, not for ecology, from the shipping, just yeah.
Actually positive. Right?
Yes, right. Yeah. I just now that's just from yeah. This is just now economically thinking. Yeah. Because like that's of course we want later to see what does this really mean for the ecology, in particular for the Arctic, which is very vulnerable and so on. Yeah. And here you see why we have various connections to Australia. They really have shipping then, and even New Zealand. So, but this means like we have maybe a winner or loser. Now, depending how you define what is winner or loser, so like of opening of the Arctic. And another question, and that's what we're trying to do now, is this is just a geometry, but in the end of the day, we want to know how ships really go through the world. And this means we have a changed geometry of ports. Can we compute what the new traffic will be? And that's not so easy. And then if you look in the literature, you can do this gravity models. That's just pairwise connection. You take pairs of ports, and that's called gravity because it's like a little bit like Newton's gravity law. Like it's a product of port sizes and divided by maybe a power law of distance or something like this. And with this, you can fit already something and on average trends. But the thing is, like you would think, like that it cannot only be on pairwise connections. So you think there is the intermediate other ports around should also play a role. And something better is maybe if you know the Simini model, the radiation model, where you say when I want to go from this port to these, then this comes from this intervening opportunities. So you say instead of a distance function here, the geographic distance, now you say maybe we have the trading distance, like the distance would be all the different ports in between, which would be intervening opportunities. So this comes from commuting. So like people want to commute from one city to the others, and where do you go? And so it's like the idea is like radiation physics. A port radiates out ships, or a city radiates out people who want a job, and they can be either absorbed already somewhere before. That's the intervening opportunities, and everything what is not absorbed here goes somewhere else. And that's the work that vary out. You can solve this model, and this is also parameterless. You just need the port sizes and the rank of distances, and then you can work with this. And this also gives a good shot, but it's a little bit too weak on large distances, and that's what I'm playing around with new versions of this. So I think you need also take into account ports a little bit later. So the opportunity, the pull of ports which are beyond, because like for example, when we hear, I mean the trading to other ports here doesn't depend only on this port, but also on the future perspectives on the way. And so in the moment, I'm playing around with different versions of these kind of statistic models of trade in order to see, can we improve this a little bit and project the shipping thing. So I'm very excited about this, what I'm doing now. And yeah, okay, maybe I should stop here. And thanks for your patience.
Yeah, this is a really cool talk. It's interesting that you're developing all these models to predict changes in shipping routes. Are there not social scientists that are developing these? I mean, I imagine this would be the domain of academics studying global supply chains and shipping, but you're doing your own modeling from scratch on this.
Yes, yes. So like
the appropriate theory doesn't exist.
There's a huge literature there, right? And sometimes it's hard to read because it's from different people. But I didn't see something which I really could use for this there. But you're totally right. There's a lot. We have even in our institute we have a social scientist. She's a geographer and is doing also shipping, but that's totally different questions they are interested in. So but then there's all the literature about this, also about trading and the economics and so on. And I mean they do also similar models like here this gravity models, for example. Yeah. The problem with the gravity models, I don't think it's so good because you have this other options between, and then you have this fitting parameters. So you fit the parameters, and then it's not sure if you now go to a new 50 years in the future, if these parameters would still be okay. So that's why I'm intrigued with these things. And
it's nice because normally when you model human ecological system interactions, the humans are really messy.
Yes.
But then you're approaching human behavior.
Yes. Yeah.
First principles.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, also really good talk. Leading on from that idea, in your earlier model of getting the probability of invasion, which was like P alien species times P survival.
Yes, all
these things. Is there any way you can propagate that forward in time? Because some of those parameters may change as more invasions happen, for instance. So as more invasive species over the course of 20 years come to the Baltic, for instance, does that change parameters in P8?
Yeah, that would be also interesting. We didn't go into this. So, I mean, that's also, I mean, you know, that you do your study, and it took much longer as we thought. And then your researcher finishes the contract, goes somewhere else, and that was other things. Like, so we had now a machinery, and we could have done so much, and we just didn't. And then also like some things, I mean, maybe also like do so many different fields, and then I suddenly say, okay, maybe there's enough invasion, and I do now my plankton model or do my salt marsh model or something. And we could have done a lot of things, and we just left this and didn't do it here. I know, yeah.
This is more of a general ecology question, but how do you define the difference between just normal spread of species and invasion?
I mean, like I said before, like what we say, range expansion is not a spread, right? But where's the criterion for this? So like here, I mean, depending like in this one database, it's if it's in a new country, right? Then it's an invasion, because otherwise it doesn't go in the database. In my model, it's if the species arrives in a new port where it was not before. So that's there. But otherwise, I mean, there's a million different definitions of invasive alien species, non-indigenous species, and so on. It's a bit talking about language here.
When you look at this historic data to 7,000 and 8,000 years ago,
Yeah.
Even without humans, the difference in species distribution would be enormous.
Yeah.
Ice age and
I mean, that's of course a bit when I show this here. I think Hanno never shows this data because, like, we don't take this series, right? We start with Columbus after 1500. But I like this a lot because it gives me very clear, well, how the database is structured, right? But these we don't. Yeah, so like that's just anecdotal if you want. But still, in the power law, what these guys are doing is still the same statistics. That's the incredible thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Just about the power law for a second, because I don't think you said when you visited you didn't need to choose the parameters.
Yes, yeah.
Could you just
Yeah.
explain that one more time?
Yeah, sure. Like in this Ewell-Simon process, like where did I write it down? Here, right? So like you have just two parameters. Like you go in discrete time. So the time is not the physical year, the time is the number of invasions. And then you have one parameter P. It tells you, do I have a new emerging species or not? And this parameter we get directly if we see how many species we have and how many countries they invaded. It's just there. So we have this parameter. It's fixed. I cannot change it. And then I have another parameter to tell me what's the probability, which is for secondary species, secondary spread, which country do I choose? And then I say it goes proportional. That's the preferential attachment plus a constant. So like, and the constant, that's also in the literature. You need this constant, otherwise you couldn't start. Like if a country has no invasion, it would never be invaded. So you need a constant. And then this I fixed, and since I just from the data tried to match, fine-tune this preferential attachment. So this parameter was also there. It's just one. In the data analysis 1 point something, and then I said take it 1. And then you do this. That's the thing which comes out. It's the beta distribution. It just has these two parameters. That's it. You can just plot it. You can do nothing here, and then it fits here. And that's the amazing things, like, because like it's too good to be true. But I don't know, like, if it's too good to be true, typically you do some stupid error. Yeah. And actually it was like this, like first it was very wrong. Like this black line was totally wrong. Oh, my normalization. Of course, always have a bug in the code. You normalize it, was still wrong. Oh, still a bug. And then suddenly it was there. Yeah. And I checked, hopefully there's no bug anymore. But it should not be. It should not be so good. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe it's a follow-up question here. So this is all the data about invasion overlap for national power law. But if I would now get a bunch of data from species that are not invading but just natural spreading, would they form a different blob in your graph or not? Or
I don't know. Yeah. So.
Because I mean, that would be a nice sort of to prove your idea that like invasion follows its power law, but natural spread is a.
Yeah, like I cannot answer this. Like what we're doing now, we do statistic models, individual based models. Yeah, so like we just have a grid of countries. You have a class of species, and with a certain probability, let them randomly invade other countries. And then it turns out this Joule-Simon process doesn't pop out there. So, the question is now, but then you need to change the rules. Why does the Joule-Simon process make such a good job? And then it's the question, like, what is the emerging species? Like, there's different hypotheses that you can put in. You can either say, for example, that every species which invades somewhere creates new niches. So you have to say you have your pool of countries, and every country has so and so many slots for invasive species. And then you could say every species which is there opens a new niche, for example. And then you can get something like this. Or you say the pool of species which are potential invasive increases over time. And that's what we try. So we don't have other data sets. We try with stochastic simulations here. In order to try why the Joule-Simon process works. Once you believe the Joule-Simon process, then it's there. And Joule-Simon process was used to describe the word frequency in text, the population of people in cities, scale-free networks, you name it, like all the power laws basically all go back to Joule-Simon process. Many of them go back to Joule-Simon. Zipf's law, exactly. Pareto law, it comes in many. There's a paper reinventing Willis because Willis was the first and it invented this, and this was invented 10 times in the literature. And you can take this process, assume it works also for invasive, and then it fits the data. I just don't really know why this process should do the job.
The idea is in case of invasion, how it works is once a species has invaded, then it's easier to go into a different region, or
you mean why? So like
in case of invasion, how it,
Yeah.
like in the context of invasion.
Yeah, so like you say, like a species which has already invaded some countries has a higher chance to invade another one, right? Because it's already spread further. And so the rich get richer. It's very natural there in some sense. Yeah? It's a very natural assumption, if you want. What's not natural is that this ratio of this is fixed. So you would say with a certain time, the more invasions you have, this P should get smaller. You should have less emerging and more secondary spreads. But the Joule-Simon says this ratio is fixed. That's
So in your, you showed the database from,
Yeah.
wow. But do you there really distinguish between range expansion and invasions, or is this merged in that data?
It's just, we just know a species is suddenly in this country. Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah, it could be a range expansion, right? Yeah. Probably many will be because like you're suddenly in the next, yeah.
And my other question was like, I didn't hear anything about time talk. So you said something like, okay, yeah.
Here's time. No, yeah, but not, yeah, you're right, yeah.
You said like of invasions.
Yes,
or-
yeah.
Time is actually
Yeah.
invasions, but
Yeah.
does that imply that you assume that the rate of invasions per unit time is constant or so, or?
Yeah. But first, something about time. In the risk model, we don't have time. Here, I mean, this is this invasive, this population dynamic spread, what you can do, which was like very easy to do. You start in Busan, in Asia, and then you see over time, now you see how the species spreads. And the interesting thing when I do it again is that you have many white dots. You have very few species there. And when it's yellow or red, it's established. So you would directly observe some individuals very fast. So that's a bit about time. And then it takes much longer until the species really can establish a population. Yeah, so like it depends, of course, what population dynamics you take in a port. And in these models, we also we put some Ali threshold in there, so a small population would go extinct again. And this So you see it takes very long, and I think here I have one where I take environmental conditions in the temperature, and then species just stay in a certain range here, and then later one will come in Europe, but it takes very long. And this addresses a bit the question why in the literature it's reported that the species we have in the North Sea for years, maybe some people who sample see it there, but it's never being spreading. And suddenly from one year it was a bit warmer or something, suddenly it's there and starts to spread. And this we can explain a little. So we looked a little bit in time, but now did this address your question or?
Yeah, you know, yes, it does.
Yeah.
So this is like putting this population dynamic models on the network.
On the network. We put the shipping network, but just take a single species and then really try to look for how the time dynamics is, how the spreading dynamics would be. But this is very hypothetical because I don't know which species I'm talking about and so on. Yeah.
But it must then still, I mean, to run this model, you have to assume that there are a certain number of ships per unit time.
Yes, that's our network. Yeah.
So there's your network is not just the number of ships, but it also has like within a certain time period.
Yes, I mean, for this 1 year, right? And then the next year we just repeat it here. Okay. And then I know how many this has a seasonal pattern and so on and so on. This we have here. Yeah. And I mean, many things is not there. Like I mean, you have all like here we have this environmental conditions. Of course, when a ship goes through the equator, water gets warm and it gets cold again. That makes a difference. If you talk about phytoplankton, it would depend if you come in spring or not, right? So like if is the nutrient-rich system or not, so like the season will play a role, and that's all not in there. So like we were thinking so many things we could potentially do, and then we just didn't. Yeah.
Okay, if there are no more questions, let's thank the speaker.